G'day, friends. Blowy here. I am super excited because I've got my good friend Death with us today. He is an expert in the healing classes in Lord of the Rings Online, and today he's going to talk to us about all the essential tips and tools and tricks that healers have in their toolkit to be able to make a raid go really well. Welcome, Death. Thank you so much for being here. And tell us about healing classes.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to be here. Yeah, so I guess getting into the healing classes first off, and we'll get into all the nitty-gritty about it. But so in Lord of the Rings Online, you've got four healing classes at the moment. The, there's got like some that are more primary classes, then some that are kind of less common, but they all are healing classes. You've got the Rune Keeper and the Minstrel, those are your main two, and then Bjorning and the Captain are also healing classes. So, like I said, most people find if you're on a healer, you'll find that they're either a rune keeper or a minstrel. They're just currently the strongest in that role, but you do every now and then see a Bjorning and a captain as healer as well, and they can work as well. Going on from there, so in terms of the role of the healer, so in a group, obviously, if you're doing group content, there's going to be damage coming into the group through mechanics from bosses, ads, whatever. And so the healer is just there to keep those health bars, those morale bars full, so if no one's dying. So obviously damage comes in, the healers kind of heal them up. You've also got pretty much every healing class also has some form of utility on top of that. So obviously primarily you're there to heal, but every class in part of that class's kit has some form of utility outside of that that helps the group in other ways. So, but definitely primarily you're just keeping people alive. What specific tools do you have as a healer to achieve that goal of keeping everyone nice and healthy? So there's a few things. The main things, you've got different types of heals. So you've got burst healing is the primary kind of way people usually think about. So health bar goes down, you use this bar skill, and the bar will go up. It's by a certain amount, right? Like you click the button, heal health goes up. Maybe there's an induction. Burst healing can obviously be single target or AoE. And those are usually what people think is like the primary form of healing. But then outside of that, you've also got heal over times, which is usually called HOTS. And so heal over time, you put it on the target, and it kind of ticks for however long. And so that's going to be like a more passive healing in cases. Sometimes they can be also very strong heal over times. But usually your burst heals are more your like very instant forms of heals, and your HOTS are more kind of passive, slowly ticking in the background. And then on top of that, a lot of healing classes have some form of bubbles. That's mainly the Runekeeper and the Minstrel have access to the bubbles, which is also part of what makes them a bit more popular and a bit stronger. But bubbles are really good because obviously you think about that health bar going down, a bubble basically just increases that health bar or mitigates that health bar going down. So bubbles can be really good. And then you've also got pretty much every healing class has some form of damage reduction skill. So there's again the Runekeeper and the Minstrel have kind of the best access to skills that reduce incoming damage on themselves and the group, compared to the Bjorning and the Captain, which is also one of the reasons why those classes are less commonly used in a lot of cases. So you could obviously think damage reduction is going to be really huge because if you want to prevent those health bars going down during the fight, if you reduce the numbers that are coming in, then that's going to help you achieve that goal there. So, and a lot of times those are also tied to the bubbles. So you put a bubble, they have that extra morale fresh like bar, and they also get damage reduction on top of that while that bubble exists. And then kind of finally the last kit you have is revive. So obviously, sometimes things don't quite go your way. You know, you're trying to keep people nice and healthy, but no, someone got overwhelmed or you messed up somehow as the healer, and then boom, someone's dead. Usually, the healing classes are the ones that have the revive skills. So someone goes down, it's also your job to res them and bring them back up. Obviously, other classes that aren't healers also have revives, but it's a bit rarer in those cases that they do have that. So usually it's on the healers to play that role, or classes that have a healing role, right? You might be the class that has a healing spec, but you're playing it in a different spec, but they still have access to a res in a lot of cases. So that's kind of going over obviously all the healing the healer have, what's their role. So now thinking getting into kind of what during a fight, like how do you use that kit, right? You've got all these skills at your disposal, all these types of skills, all this utility. So like, well, how do you actually use that when you're in a fight? And so I call that the healing profile. So you go into a fight, you got to think. I said you on your screen, you've got your ally health bars on the screen, and so you're mostly looking at obviously well, who's taking the damage, right? So if you see a green bar going down, that's obviously an indication that they need to be healed. In general cases, the people that are taking more damage obviously need more healing, but there's a little bit more dynamic to that because obviously in most contexts, the tank is usually going to be the one having aggro. So the tank usually takes the most damage. So a lot of the healer's role is going to be kind of sitting there targeting the tank and healing the tank while they take damage. And then so usually that's when things are going well. Obviously, the tank takes damage and you heal them up. When you have to switch off is sometimes when things go wrong, right? Say a tank failed to have aggro. Well, now the DPS is suddenly the tank, or even you as the healer, you draw aggro for your heal. So suddenly you find yourself tanking the ads, and so you have to heal that. So that's a one thing where you have to be kind of flexible, is knowing if aggro hasn't been managed correctly, then suddenly new targets can become the people you have to heal. So if it's a DPS pulling aggro, you heal the DPS that's got aggro. If it's you that has aggro, you heal yourself. In a lot of kind of lower tier content, this is going to be a very big dynamic. In when you get into harder tiers, when this kind of happens, it usually means that something's gone very wrong and it's probably gonna wipe very quickly. So, but in some cases, you can very well uh, keep things afloat by healing the targets that are taking damage. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is when you are hitting the tank, like I said, that's your primary role in most cases. The tanks themselves will have skills that will kind of heal themselves or reduce their damage. So this is something else to keep in mind that sometimes maybe you see the tank getting low, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to panic and blow all of your cooldowns, right? Every single skill you have, trying to keep them up. Because that tank, if you just waited, maybe that tank had a skill that would have just boom healed them to full. So it can help as a healer to kind of know what the tanks have in their kits as well. What do they have at their disposal so that you don't feel as stressed while healing? It's because healing can definitely at times be a very stressful endeavor. But if you're more aware of kind of what other people in your group have to kind of keep themselves alive, then it can be less stressful in some cases. And it also can be an indicator of when you need a stress, right? If you know that a tank has already used all these skills that they can use, now you know that, well, it's my time, like my time to shine. I have to step in and kind of keep them up.
Yeah,
So that's kind of,
that's
yeah,
sometimes
you
when
go.
you hear the tank shouting, "I'm out of CDs." Right.
Yeah, the tanks. Hopefully, if the tank's being helpful, they can call out for you, like, and that's when you hear the tanks panicking, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a big one. So, like I said, usually you're gonna be healing the tank, and just keep in mind you might not need to blow everything to keep the tank up because hopefully the tank's using their own cooldowns to do that. There are obviously going to be times when the tank does get low and you will have to use resources to keep them up. But oftentimes, in a lot of content in LOTRO in particular, it can often be better to save some of your bigger skills for when the people that aren't the tank are about to take damage. Because usually the tank's there with really strong mitts. So when the damage comes in, it kind of tickles them. But say an instance has a mechanic that's going to come in and it's going to hit everyone in the whole group, right? Say it's a six man. So all six people in the group are going to take a hit. You know that the tank's only going to take a slither of that hit, right? Like maybe they get dropped 25%. But that same hit to everyone else might drop them to like half health, right? And so in this case, it's much more important to use a cooldown there for the kind of group, right? Less so for the tank, because the tank is probably completely fine in that case. They've dropped a quarter of their health. They can probably heal that back up on their own. But all the other people, right? The DPS, the CC, a debuffer, and yourself as the healer, you generally have less kind of tools to heal up quickly. So that's when you as the healer kind of want to use your cooldowns. And so it's also where the healer, as a healer, a big part of your role is to know the damage profile of the high, right? I talked about healing profile, but the damage profile, right? You're using the healing profile matches the damage profile to a degree. So when damage comes in, that's when you need to use your heals to heal everyone back up. So like I said, in this case, a big hit comes in. If you know ahead of time that that's coming up, you know that you save your cooldowns for that, right? And then if you know that that big hit came in, maybe you know that, oh, there's after that big hit, there's actually not any big hit coming in immediately after, right? If you know that, then you might just go, well, I don't have to use my big hit cooldown here, right? I can just slowly heal people back up. But if you know that the big hit comes in and then very shortly after there's likely to be another big hit, now you know that it's very important that you use resources to get people topped up. The other thing is leading up to that hit, right? I said maybe this hit is going to drop everyone to 50% health apart from the tank. If you know that that's the case, right? It's going to take 50% of the health. You know that you need to keep everyone above that 50% threshold before that mechanic comes in.
Mm.
And so that's where like heal over times come into play, right? If you know that everyone's going to be taking a hit, then getting your hots out so that everyone is passively kept at full. And maybe even you might even need to blow a cooldown before the damage comes in, right? Say for whatever reason someone's been brought low, and so someone's at 30% of their morale, and you know that mechanic's about to come in a few seconds, you might need to blow that cooldown ahead of time to top that person off. Then the damage comes in, boom, you just like saved them, right? You gave them that morale cushion so that the mechanic didn't kill them. And then you can now heal them up after the mechanic having come through. So as the healer, it can be quite important to kind of know the fight, know when damage comes in relatively. You don't have to like know it, to the second, but if you have a general idea of when damage comes, then it's a lot easier to keep on top of things. Obviously, in some cases, you might be new to a fight and you don't know, and then in which case you're going to be a lot more reactionary. So you just have to hope that you can keep everyone up as much best as you can. And if you see damage come in, you have to kind of heal up. But it's definitely that's a lot more stressful, right? If you're playing that way in all cases, you're probably going to be a lot more kind of stressed out, and you're not going to know when people are going to die, when you need to use heals. But if you know ahead of time, kind of generally when people are going to take damage, when people need to be at full health, it makes your role a lot less stressful, and you can be a lot more tactical on kind of when do you use your bubbles to increase everyone's morale, right? Like I said, think about again to that example of the mechanic that's going to bring everyone down to 50% morale. If you threw out a bubble before that hit came in, that's like an extra cushion right on top to absorb some of that damage. So bubbles can be really good in that case. And again, like I said, the damage reduction utility, right? So you know that it's hit's going to come in, that's going to bring everyone to 50%. But if you use some skill that reduces the group's incoming damage by half, 50%, then now suddenly when that hit comes in, people only get dropped down 25%, right? Rather than 50%. Obviously, it mathematically, it's going to be all weird with how different numbers interact, but that's obviously a rare, if you have a skill that can reduce damage like that, it's a very good opportunity to use it in that case. So something would be like a Runekeeper's Our Fate's Entwined Stone will reduce incoming damage by 20%. So stuff like that is really good in those cases. Yeah. And then, so like I said, I talked about obviously heal over time. So just in general, so I talked about like specific mechanics. In terms of just like generally, what are you doing to keep people up? So you've got just passive damage coming in. That's when you're just going to use your very, very low cooldown, your kind of less intensive resources, put your hots on the people that you think are going to take damage or are taking damage. Use your burst heals to respond to small instances of damage. And you're just trying to keep people above a certain threshold so that you know they're not going to just die from whatever mechanic's about to come their way. Sound like you were about to say something with that.
Yeah, so two things that I have is, um, what do you do when you're overhealing? Can you talk to a little bit
Mm.
about that? Because sometimes I see healers just focusing on the tank, overhealing the tank and neglecting some of the other players. So, can you talk a little bit maybe about how to break out of that?
Yeah, overhealing is definitely a very easy habit to fall into because you just think, well, I just need to heal the tank, heal the tank. Let me just throw everything into the tank, use everything, use it all up. But obviously, if the tanks, like I said, there's a threshold that the tank needs to be at to survive any given hit, right? So if you're keeping the tank at a healthy range, then there's no reason to really throw in any further healing. So really, if you think, like I said, you want to match your healing profile to the damage profile. So if the tank is taking 20k damage per second from all like ads and the boss, then you only really need to give roughly 20k heals per second to that tank, right? If you were giving that tank 40k heals per second, half of that is just completely wasted. Yeah, like you don't need to be doing that. So you could be running out of power for no reason. You could be blowing skills that you don't need to, that you could have saved for an instance that's about to come up. And then also you're also going to remember if that tank is taking 20k and you're healing 20k, even that's probably not necessary because the tank themselves are going to be self-healing. They might be getting healed from another healer. So there's definitely like there's often no need to really overheal targets in LOTRO especially. But so it's in terms of like overcoming that. So once you just I guess once you realize, right, that all you really need to do with your heals is keep people at a certain threshold, then like I said, it can be a lot less stressful if you know kind of what's about to come. And that way you just passively heal people up to a certain degree. And then when the damage comes in, then you respond. Or when you know that the damage is coming in, you preactively do the bubble, you do the damage reduction, and you
One
base it around when damage is actually going to come in.
one thing that on that note is um I think a lot of times what I see in lower tier content, everybody likes it when their bar is completely green and they're 100% healed up. But I think what people don't understand is in mid-tier and high-tier content, that's not always going to be the case that you can be able to keep everybody at 100%. Um,
Yeah.
so can you talk to us maybe about how do you go about, you talked a little bit about prioritizing who gets heals, but can you talk about
Mhm.
how to coordinate that with the other healer that's in your raid?
Well, Lotro, this is a bit different to other MMOs because in a raid, Lotro often has the healers. Their AoE heals are generally like fellowship only, which is quite different to a lot of MMOs either already have a raid-wide healing system or they've moved from a fellowship to a raid-wide system. But Lotro kind of is holding on to the classic system where AoE heals are fellowship wide. So generally, the way a raid's going to be composed is you have one healer in each fellowship of the raid, and those healers are kind of responsible for their fellowship that they're in. So if damage is coming into that person that healer's fellowship, then they're mostly responsible for that. Obviously, in that dynamic, if your fellowship is completely healthy, then you can cross heal and help out the other healer with theirs, which is obviously for tank healing, for example, is a big thing. Like if both healers are generally going to be healing the tanks a lot, but one of the healers is kind of doing it from the other fellowship, and so they're helping the heal the tanks quite a bit. But when the DPS group, for example, starts taking damage, they're going to be the primary one that's responding to that and swapping their attention to the DPS, while the other healer might do that less so. Yeah, so the healer that's put in the tank group is generally going to be primarily focused with the tanks. But like I said, it's going to be quite dynamic because if the tanks aren't needing the heals and the DPS is needing all the heals, then it's going to swap, right? Like the person in the tank group is going to cross heal into the DPS group, and the healer in the DPS group is going to be focusing their own group. So the next kind of big topic we wanted to get into was kind of positioning. And so the first one was just talking about positioning of the group. So obviously, generally your healers only have a certain range that they can kind of heal, and also their effects generally being AoE, it might only be a certain radius around the healer, or it might be like a targeted AoE in a certain spot. So, as a DPS or a tank or just anyone that's part of the group, it's a good idea to always be positioned kind of close together or in a pre-specified spot so that the heals can actually hit you. You know, if you're standing 50 meters out of the group all by yourself, kind of doing being a sniper, if you take damage, then oftentimes the heals won't actually hit you. So it's good as other people in the group, it's good to be grouped up, even if you're ranged. Sometimes it's often better to come into melee range, depending on the mechanics of the instance. And then obviously that way, when the healers try to use their skills, it'll hit the other people in the group. And then in terms of the your positioning as the healer, you want to position in such a way that it facilitates this healing to occur, right? So if you have a AoE heal that's 20 meters radius around yourself, you obviously want to be positioned somewhere that such that everyone else in the group is at least 20 meters within your range. So, and obviously that's generally going to be still behind the boss. You're not going to go stand with the tank and get kind of frontal to death, but you're going to be somewhere with the group standing behind the boss, and you kind of want to be close such that your heals will hit the tanks, will hit the people behind the boss, the DPSs, everyone. So that's generally in terms of your positioning. There's obviously some fights are going to have more advanced mechanics where maybe the tanks are off out of the group, dealing with ads, dealing with whatever's going on. And so there, your positioning might change a little. Like maybe you have to position, say there's two clusters, right? Maybe the boss is over here on one tank, and then another tank, a second tank, has the ads over here. And so you maybe need to be that midpoint, like somewhere in the middle, so that you can heal. Your heals can reach one tank and the other tank. So it's going to depend on the mechanics, depend on where tanks are standing, where the group's standing. But you want to be somewhere that's safe, where you can reach the largest number of people that you possibly can while being out of danger. So generally in Lotro, that's it's not going to be too complicated. You kind of just stand with the group behind the boss, but there are going to be very niche cases where things get kind of chaotic in terms of positioning of the whole group. So it
Temple.
no, yeah, yeah. Some boss
Temple.
Temple's usually pretty good, but like, yeah, Wing One, Boss Two of Temple, for example, you might need a position quite a ways away from the group so that you can heal the other tank. Yeah, and like I said, it'll also depend on the skills that you have as the healer. Like some healers have skills with very long range, short range, so you can kind of play like there's often the case that kind of AoE skills have rather short range, but your single target skills will have a longer range. So there's a lot of cases where, say, you can position with your group for the AoE heals, but you can still target a tank that's far away and do the single target heals on them. So you can also keep that in mind that can often mean that your positioning can be closer to the melee cluster compared to the tank. You don't always have to run off and kind of piggyback the tank off out on their own. You can kind of hit them with your ranged skills.
To help facilitate this discussion, if we can maybe pick a current boss fight and you
Mhm.
can walk us through understanding how to match your healing profile to the damage
Mm,
profile.
it's a good idea. Do you have a boss fight in mind that you reckon people struggle with healing wise, or that's popular, or
Wing
Um,
2, Boss 2. That's usually the
Wing Two
worst
boss
one.
two? Okay,
yeah, that's
yeah,
With
yeah, Evie is
That's
right.
usually the
cool
worst
water.
one.
Yeah, for in terms of what I've seen is well, that wing has a lot of environmental mechanics.
Mm.
So we can talk about
So
it
it's make it
from
a bit
that makes
tricky.
it challenging. Walk us through how you would go about managing your healing profile and matching it to that
Yep.
damage profile.
Yeah, in terms of healing that one, like you said, a big part of what makes that fight challenging is that a lot of the damage is environmental. And so the individual players are going to be responsible in some degree to how much damage they take. So when you're with less coordinated players, they're going to take a lot more damage compared to players that are kind of more aware of their positioning, more aware of the mechanics. And so it's a case of you sometimes have to toss up, right? Say you've got someone that's just standing in the puddle, completely oblivious to the fact that they're currently taking 1 million damage a second. You might just have to go, well, that person's just a lost cause. I'm wasting resources trying to keep them up right now. They're not moving. I'm just gonna let them drop. You might have to. Sometimes you have to make that. Sometimes you have to make
Decision.
that call as
War
a healer
Master?
that that this person's just not worth it to keep alive right now.
Exactly.
But
War
there are
Master.
also going to be cases where maybe someone just messed up their positioning, right? Like, oh, whoops, I've been found in the wrong spot, and they're in the process of correcting that. And so there is obviously going to be a case if you can give that person some healing, so they can live long enough to make that adjustment in positioning, then they'll survive. So that's a case where you do want to initially give people the healing so they can correct their positioning. But if the person's not correcting their mistake, then
Nope.
it can be not, sometimes it's not worth blowing all your resources into someone that's just going to die anyway 5 seconds later, right? So that's a big thing on boss 4, which is, like I said, wing 2, boss 2. The other thing in that fight is there's a mechanic with the bloods. I forget the
Whisper of
actual name of
blood.
the skill.
Whisper of
Whisper of
Blood.
Blood. So Whisper of Blood is obviously a mechanic where if things go correctly and someone um uses the skill at the correct time, boom, no one takes damage, right? But in a less coordinated group, you're more likely to not have that go correctly, and then boom, the whole raid's gonna take a big burst of damage. And again, that's going to be very dynamic, right? Because if things aren't going correctly, you're going to have to heal way more than if things are going smoothly, which is often the case, right? As a healer,
Mhm.
the healers want things to be going smooth, going to plan, because when things don't go to plan, that's when damage dramatically increases. So there are going to be there are potentially going to be times in a group doing boss 4 that it's just kind of not really realistic to actually heal people, right? If every single whisper of blood goes off, if people just completely ignore the rotating kind of danger zones and they just take all the damage that they possibly can, it might just be right. Like you might just not be able to heal that. But the idea is obviously you're going to be healing when those things happen. So when the whisper of blood comes in, if you know that every single whisper of blood is being missed, right? If you know that no one's doing the skill, well, firstly maybe just take that role on yourself, right? Like you can do that as a healer. Maybe you take it upon yourself, you do the skill, but there might be a case where well you're not comfortable doing it, and so you might have to then do a bubble, right? Like maybe you're on a runekeeper, you throw out your AoE bubble when whisper of blood happens, and then you can kind of like save people from dying to that. And again, maybe you notice there's a few people that are a bit slow to change their positioning. And so maybe you hot those people up a bit more. Maybe you give them a bit more resources so that they can survive and move to a safer location. You've also got to consider, in terms of that fight in particular, there's a lot of ad waves. So very often you might take more damage, right? If the tank doesn't have their taunts up yet or they're mismanaging their aggro, you got to keep watch yourself as the ads come in to kind of give yourself a healing, but also the whoever you think is the top DPS. So it's often a very good skill as the healer to know who is the highest damage dealer
Mhm.
because they're likely to take aggro, and so you're gonna have to heal them. And they're whoever's doing the most damage is probably also somewhat of a carry, right? If there's the concept of a whoever's carrying the raid to a degree, right? And if you can keep that person that's doing top DPS up, if you can keep them alive, then the chances of success are a lot higher. But for example, if it's a red, right, you've got a red LM that's just like doing insane damage. If you know ahead of time, yeah, the red LM's likely to get aggro here. Let me hop them up. Let me give them a bubble, right? Like stuff like that. Knowing ahead of time that these things are likely to happen can help you kind of get ahead of it and keep on top of it and react to it faster, right? If you know that a certain scenario is it's likely to happen, you can react to it a lot faster compared to kind of going, oh, my red Lawmaster is taking a lot of damage. I wonder why that is. Guess I should give them some heals. But if you know, oh, red Lawmaster has aggro, let me heal them, right? If you know why it's happening, it's usually a lot easier to respond to it and to know how much resources you have to give. Like if you know the red Lawmaster is taking damage because of they have aggro, then you know, oh, I need to like use a lot of healing here. But if you just see the red Lawmaster taking damage and you go, oh, I guess they're like standing in a puddle, maybe like they're just going to move out of it, right? Like you might not realize how urgent the situation is if you're not aware of kind of why a certain person is taking damage.
So what I'm hearing here is that um, with playing the healer, kind of you gotta not only have situational awareness
Mhm.
about what's going on, but the really good healers are those that are more proactive than reactive,
Mm, for
right?
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, they're more proactive, but they're also very good at being reactive, right? So
Hmm.
so I'd say like a less skilled healer is basically only going to be reactive, right? Like because they're not gonna have that situational awareness. They're not gonna know what mechanics are coming in. They're not gonna know why damage is gonna come in. So they kind of just react to heals. Like they react to damage as it happens. But a better healer is going to be, like you said, more proactive. So they know the mechanics, they know when damage is coming in, they know why damage is coming in, and they can deal with that. But they're also, when the damage does come in or when things go wrong, they're better at being reactive because they maybe know what went wrong. They know why someone suddenly needs heals, and they can react to it with a better response to the person that's only being reactive, right?
Something to be said about learning the fight and learning the healing profile.
Yeah. And that's where like specifically for boss one, it's definitely a big thing when new people come into that role to try and heal it. They kind of often rely on other people to make that call out, right? They say, oh, this person has eye, right? And so
Yeah.
and if they're relying on that, they're going to be slower to kind of select the target, get the hots up beforehand, start
Hmm.
healing them, right? Like get all the damage reduction in. But if you're kind of aware that that is going to be a mechanic and maybe you have a plugin for it, right? That tells you ahead of time. And if you're the one kind of seeing as soon as the eye target is selected, you know, okay, this person's going to take damage. Let me get all my hots running. The damage is about to come in. Let me get the bubble up. Let me get the damage reduction on, right? Your success at healing that eye is going to be dramatically higher than if you're waiting for someone to say, oh, this person has eye, and then you gotta go, oh, where's that person in my, in my raid vitals? There they are. Let me get the heals up. Oh, they've already died. Whoops. Right,
Yeah.
right. Like that's definitely a case where plugins for that boss in particular, like plugins can be a big help in fights with very mechanic based damage.
Hmm.
That's where like plugins can be a lifesaver. The big advantage of mini raid is more kind of making the healing you like the UI to select targets because as a healer
Yeah.
you're a lot more responsible for clicking actual fellowship vitals compared to any other role, right? Like no other role has to click the fellowship vitals as much as a healer does. And so that's where a lot of people dislike how small the
Hmm.
default UI can be for targeting players. And also that there's no right like on a big thing that mini raid has is you can set the threshold indicator. So like say when someone drops below 75%, you can make their health bar turn red. And it's like, oh, danger, I got to heal that person, right? That's a big thing that people like about mini raid because the obviously the default UI just has a green bar that goes down the whole way. There's no indicator of like when should I start panicking, when should I start healing that person. Whereas with mini raid, you can kind of set that up ahead of time. Like if anyone drops below 50%, that's when I want it to be danger, danger, heal this person.
The other thing I like about mini raid is that you can arrange the players however you
Yes,
want.
yes. If you
And so
if you like having tanks in a certain spot, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I always have my tanks and my other healer in a very specific spot because
Mm.
those two take prior, and then the major DPSer. I have
Yeah,
them
yeah.
always in the same spot so that it's very easy for me to just monitor those three first because they're going to take priority over everybody else. There are certain instances where a boss like the Eye will target somebody directly.
Hmm.
Um, in those situations, um, I mean, I guess it's by trial and error, right? That you will learn whether or not only the minstrel can handle it, or only the blue RK, or, it requires
Yeah.
everybody, like that type of evaluation of a fight. Like who's healing what in the fight.
Mm.
It
I'd
goes a little it
say
goes a little bit deeper, right?
in LOTRO there's rarely there's rarely an instance where like what you're saying where like one healer only responds to the damage and the other one doesn't. Generally, it's going to be a case of when the damage is coming in, like I said, you deal with the damage in your fellowship primarily, but any damage that's coming in, if both healers are in range to heal the person taking damage, then it is both healers' responsibility to keep that person alive. And there's that balance, right, of well, if both healers are leaving the tank, say, to heal another target, if the tank suddenly goes down, where you know that you clearly either one of the healers kind of
Has to stay on
didn't
the tank.
do, yeah, well, it's more because the healers can leave the tank for a period and then come back to the tank, right? Like it's
Mhm.
it's it's good to be reactive in terms of like swapping targets for healing, but also swapping back targets is very important as well. That
Mm.
we can't just go this person's taking damage, let me swap to them, heal, 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 heal. You need to know at what point is that person done needing heals, right? So in case of the eye, for example, like I said, a healer that doesn't have the plugin is not going to know, well, when does has this eye, like when has this person
Stop.
stopped taking damage? Because if you don't know, then you might just sit there healing that person for the next 20 seconds and not realize that, well, I don't know, I can't remember how long the eyes last, but say the eye lasts 10 seconds, right? If you don't realize when that 10 seconds has ended, or you didn't realize it was 10 seconds, you could sit there healing that person for 20 seconds and half of that was just completely wasted, yeah. So knowing when to swap back or when to stop healing is also very valuable. And like I said, so that's the case with knowing the mechanic, yeah. Because if the person, so someone's taking damage, you've had a good reaction, you've swapped to it, you've healed them. If you now know they're safe, that you've topped them off, boom, you're done, then you can immediately, very quickly swap back. But if you're hesitant, right, if you go, well, I think they've done taking damage, right, like you're going to be hesitant in your reaction time to swap to a new primary target to heal. And so that's another case where knowing the mechanics, knowing why that person took damage, right? Like what was the source of that damage? Was it a dot? Because if it's a dot, then you might need to continue healing that person for a bit longer. But if it was just like oh, whoops, they accidentally got swiped by the boss frontal,
Frontal.
then well, that was just a accident. Like I can just slowly heal them up and then be done, right? Like they're not in imminent danger of taking more damage in that case. And so again, just knowing the kind of why the damage is coming in as a heal is going to be really, really beneficial to managing your stress levels, managing your reaction times and whatnot.
Yeah,
That's stress levels.
it reminds me of there was one fight in Gundabad where you had to heal somebody all the way up to 100% for them
Exactly. Yeah.
to stop taking damage.
Yeah. That's another relatively common, not super common, but yeah, like mechanics like that where, someone has to be healed to full, or it kind of comes into, like I said, also where if you know someone's going to take a certain amount of damage, and then you have to, for example, it's not really something that comes into play on any of the lower tiers, but for tier three, uh, Wing One Boss Two of Temple, there is the case that with the strat that most groups use, you have to give the the only way for the tanks to survive a certain mechanic is to give them a certain level of damage reduction. And so you as the healer need to know when do they need that damage reduction, and you have to guarantee that the tank has that damage reduction when it's needed. And so that's a case of like it that is like almost entirely on the healer to have the awareness of when that mechanic happens, know what their damage reduction skill is and when how to apply it to that tank, and which obviously the timing is like super important. But stuff like that stuff like that's less common in like the lower tiers, right? Like when you get into lower tier content, a lot more of it is just going to be reactionary because, like I said, there's generally less coordination in lower tiers. So like tanks maybe don't have aggro as often as you'd like, and so you need to be aware of that, and you're going to have to heal for that reason. Or people don't know the mechanics as well, so they take damage to mechanics that they don't need to, and you have to heal because of that. So in terms of lower tier content, it is often going to be a lot more reactionary because you're not gonna things won't go to plan, right? Like in a very coordinated group, if you have an actual kind of raid group that gets together weekly, say, then you'll know, okay, in this fight, we're only going to take damage when this happens, right? So I'm going to save everything for that. But if you just suddenly join a raid and you might think, right, you might plan ahead of time, okay, that mechanic's going to happen here. That's when I'm going to use my heals. But then suddenly you go, oh, wait, that person just took damage. That person just, what? Oh, it's going to be like chaos, right? So it is going to be the case that it's actually almost more stressful to be a healer in lower tiers at times compared to being a healer in more coordinated groups. So
That's generally why I avoid tier one hard groups because I know
that's
how
the thing, but
bad.
it's also why it's very good, practice as a healer. Any group that you join as a healer, it's always going to be a fun time, right? Because you don't know who you're going to be with. You don't know what challenges are going to get thrown at you. You don't know how much damage the group's planning to take that day, right?
Oh,
Whereas as a DPS, it's generally a lot, right? You're just there. I do damage, right? That's the DPS brain. But as a healer, like you don't know what you don't know what's coming your way, right? That's some of it's the
yeah.
excitement of the healing role. It's gonna be different every time.
I want to thank Death once again for coming out today and helping us with the Healing
My pleasure.
Essentials video. And y'all stay tuned. We're going to be having lots more videos coming your way in the coming weeks. Thanks so much, and as always, happy hunting.